Good afternoon from the Arcadian Court in downtown Toronto, and welcome once again to the 113th season of the Empire Club of Canada. For those of you who are just joining us either through our webcast, our podcast, or live on Rogers TV, welcome to the broadcast. And before our distinguished speaker is introduced today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our head table guests. So I would ask that each of our head table guests rise as their name is called. Traditionally, we usually ask people to refrain from applauding, but that never works, so as people are called up, clap all you want to. Okay, we'll start with Ambassador David MacNaughton, our guest of honor today, Canada's Ambassador to the United States. Mr. Darrell White, Chief Operating Officer of BMO Financial Group. Ms. Jenny Coco, the CEO of the Coco Group. Mr. Ali Badrudin, Managing Director, Management Consulting at StrategyCorp and a Director at the Empire Club of Canada. Mr. Kevin Safrance, Chief Operating Officer of Mastronardi Produce. Ms. Vivian Clubb, President at Provincial Pictures Incorporated. Mr. Chris Benedetti, Principal at Sussex Strategy Group and Director at the Empire Club of Canada. Mr. Barry R. Campbell, President and Founder of Campbell Strategies. Mr. Mike White, President and CEO of IBK Capital. And my name is Paul Fogelin. In my day job, I am the Vice President of the Ontario Retirement Communities Association and your President of the Empire Club of Canada this season. Ladies and gentlemen, our head table. So in celebration of Canada's sesquicentennial, try to say that 5 times fast, we have a tradition, and we have a cake up here. I'd like to call up the Ambassador and Mike White, the CEO of IBK, which is our sponsor for the sesquicentennial series, and we'll do a ceremony of blowing out the candles. We got the permit. Okay.
We'll do what we can.
Okay, we'll make a wish.
Should we all say Happy Birthday, Canada?
Right? Happy birthday, Canada.
1, 2, 3.
Happy birthday, Canada. And before I formally introduce our guest of honor, we have a magnificent turnout today, and we have some guests that I do want to point out who have joined us. First off, the Right Honourable, the former Prime Minister, is here today. If you could join us, Mr. John Turner. We also have former Premier of Ontario, David Peterson. Mr. Peterson, where are you? And we also have 3 past presidents, to my knowledge, Mr. Noble Chumar, Mr. Bill Laidlaw, and Ms. Nona MacDonald. And finally, the Ambassador has been kind enough to take some questions and answers at the end of his speech. So our staff will be going around. There's paper on your table to write down a question, and they'll collect them, and I'll be reading those questions at the end of the Ambassador's speech. So in April of 1987, Alan Gottlieb, who was Canada's ambassador to the United States at that time, addressed the Empire Club, just a few months before the historic signing of the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement, which was the precursor to NAFTA. In a speech focused on dispelling Canadian myths about the United States, Ambassador Gottlieb spoke at length about what he calls the trade myth, that Americans are deeply committed to free trade throughout the world, that there is consensus that global free trade is in U.S. national best interests, and that protectionist pressure represents a blip on the radar. Gottlieb goes on to say, quote, protectionism in the U.S. is not a temporary aberration, but rather a deep-rooted political response to structural challenges in the U.S. economy. The sentiment that the rest of the world is not playing fair is deep, broad, and growing. Protectionism is not going to disappear soon, nor is it going to spare Canadians." End quote. Who would have thought that a quote from a speech in 1987 could resonate so strongly 30 years later? Canadian reaction to the election of President Trump has been varied, to say the least. But what is consistent is the pervasive sense of uncertainty. The what comes next. Anytime there's a change in leadership in Washington, there's always a bit of unpredictability concerning how will that president govern in relation to how they campaigned. But there really is no analog to the situation we're facing today. A president who has never had governing experience occupying the Oval Office. In light of this, I can't think of a more fitting time for us to be hearing from our ambassador to the United States. Mr. MacNaughton has graciously offered to speak to us on a variety of subjects, including but not limited to environment, the border, Keystone, and yes, of course, trade. As part of our sesquicentennial series, the ambassador will speak to the value of the unique historical relationship between our two countries, in particular, the strength of the partnership that will endure through these uncharted territories and beyond. David MacNaughton presented his credentials as Canada's ambassador to the United States on March the 3rd of 2016. As a seasoned entrepreneur and political strategist, Mr. MacNaughton brings a unique set of skills and experiences to his role as ambassador. Colleagues have described him as having whip-smart political savvy and a record of sound judgment and consensus building that reaches beyond partisan divides. In the 1980s, Mr. MacNaughton transformed the public affairs industry by building an organization that combined government relations, public opinion research, and public relations. After selling his business in 1989, Mr. MacNaughton became president of Canada's largest government and public relations firm, and subsequently the North American president of the world's largest public relations firm. From 1995 until 2003, Mr. MacNaughton was president of Strathshore Financial and was an advisor to one of Canada's leading investment institutions. Mr. MacNaughton's public sector experience includes work at both the federal and provincial levels. He was principal secretary to the Premier of Ontario from 2003 to 2005, and from 2005, Chairman of StrategyCorp until he became ambassador. Active in community affairs, Mr. MacNaughton has served on a number of boards, including but not limited to the North York General Hospital, the Stratford Festival, and TIFF. Mr. MacNaughton is married and has 4 daughters. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Canada's ambassador to the United States, Mr. David MacNaughton.
Thanks very much, Paul. It's a pleasure to be back here in my hometown of Toronto. I'd like, before I get into the substance of my remarks, to spend a minute to talk about the tragedy that happened in Quebec City last night. I know that the Prime Minister has conveyed his sympathies to the families involved, and I know that the President of the United States has just recently phoned the Prime Minister and conveyed the sympathies of the people of the United States to our Prime Minister and to the people involved. It is always, these days, an unfortunate occurrence that is happening too often when these events occur, and I know we all feel badly for those in Quebec City. As I said, it's a delight to be here. I'm happy to see former Prime Minister John Turner, David Peterson. When Paul was talking about some of the comments that some people have said about me, some nice things that they've said, I do recall at one point, I think it was in 1987, walking into Premier Peterson's office, and he was there with a couple other people, and he looked up and he saw me coming, and he said, "Here comes the most devious SOB I've ever met in my life." And my remark was, "Thanks very much. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me, Premier." As indicated by Paul, I've now been in Washington for almost a year, I said to the Prime Minister in taking on this responsibility that I wasn't looking for a sinecure, but a real job, a tough job, a job that would cause me to use all of my abilities and then some. Well, I guess that falls into the category of being careful of what you ask for. Seriously, though, it's an honor and a privilege to represent your country abroad. To do so as Ambassador to the U.S., our most important trading partner, ally, and friend, is truly special. I want to spend the time I have with you to give my assessment of what some of the factors are that have caused the change that we see manifesting itself in the United States, how I see the current administration and its first 10 days, and what I see going forward for our relationship with our neighbor to the south, perhaps I should say our neighbors to the south. I think the anxiety that many Americans have been feeling that caused them to want to see a change is felt not only in the United States, but is evident throughout the world. The dynamic impact, the expansion of global trade, and the transformation of our entire economy through rapid adoption of new technology has created new wealth and lifted many out of poverty. That new wealth, however, has been very unevenly distributed, and the disruption to many segments of our society have been profound and painful. For many Americans, this phenomenon was very real, and many of those affected felt no one in Washington was listening to them. Or worse, they were telling them that they were wrong and they didn't understand. Bernie Sanders tapped into that sentiment, and so did Donald Trump. While I won't claim to have predicted the outcome of the U.S. election, I didn't. But it didn't surprise me. The Prime Minister said frequently during the U.S. election, "We will work with whomever the people of the United States elect." He meant it. We were prepared ourselves for any outcome, and since the election, we have engaged with the new President's team frequently and, for the most part, positively. Many observers were of the view that what Donald Trump, the candidate, said during the election campaign would be different from what Donald Trump, the president, would do once elected. It's understandable that many would think that. We have all witnessed candidates who, once in power, once confronted with reality rather than seeking electoral success, have modified their views and their actions. We could not assume that this was the case, and we didn't. We immediately after the election, we signaled publicly that we were prepared to discuss improvements to NAFTA. Some advised keeping our heads down, hoping that either the new president would abandon his commitment to significantly change NAFTA or focus only on our other partner in that tripartite agreement, Mexico. I have no problem keeping my head down. I just don't believe in sticking it in the sand. Changes to NAFTA are coming, and changes to NAFTA are needed. The case we need to make to the U.S., and the case we have been making and will continue to make, is that the changes we seek are not just for our benefit, but for the mutual benefit of both our countries. We obviously will be consulting and have consulted with sectors of the economy, of our economy, who might be affected. I obviously prefer, for reasons that I think you'll understand, not to negotiate these changes in public. I should also say something about our friends, the Mexicans. Some have suggested, both in the Mexican media and the Canadian press, that somehow we are not being supportive of their cause or their interests. Let me be clear. We are putting forth suggestions that will maintain NAFTA as a vibrant tripartite agreement. We prefer to seek solutions that benefit all three countries. We do, however, have an obligation, as do the Mexicans and the Americans, to have a laser-like focus on those things that are best, first and foremost, for Canadians. We will not forget that. We do believe NAFTA has been good for all three of us, and we will strive to make it more effective. We also, however, have a significant bilateral relationship with the United States, and there are many issues that are clearly outside of NAFTA and are critical to creating and maintaining good-paying jobs in Canada and in the United States, and preserving the safety of our citizens and promoting peace and stability throughout the world with the U.S. and our other allies. In that regard, we have tried to focus on areas where our interests and our policies are similar or complementary to the new administration. Let me highlight a few of those areas. First and foremost, both our Prime Minister and the U.S. President are striving to help create good-paying middle-class jobs. Currently, more than 9 million U.S. jobs depend on trade and investment with Canada. That trade has been more or less in balance for many years, but more importantly, our two-way trade has made both our economies more efficient and more competitive and given our consumers better quality products at better prices. As technology, innovation, and human capital become more and more important to success, the erection of barriers to the flow of goods, capital, and people and ideas between our two countries would not only impede our growth, it would halt it. Some of the ideas that are being advanced in the United States that are being labeled as protectionism should instead carry the label that accurately describes their impact: destructionism. Specifically, we have advanced ideas and will continue to pursue policies that will grow both the economies of the United States and Canada. They include the expansion of pre-clearance beyond existing sites to 2 new airports, including, and most importantly, Billy Bishop, and 2 passenger rail services, as well as working with the U.S. to expand pre-clearance to cargo, which would improve efficiency and reduce border congestion. Secondly, we're talking about expanding the areas where we have harmonized regulations or recognize each other's regulatory bodies. This would not only improve efficiency, but would remove a significant burden for small and medium-sized enterprises. We will never compromise health or safety in this pursuit, but when you consider that we recognize each other's nuclear regulators and food safety inspectors, one has to believe that much more can be done. Both of our governments have identified infrastructure as a priority. We're pursuing 3 opportunities in this regard. One is working to identify cross-border infrastructure projects where we can work together to improve the efficiency of the movement of people and goods. Another is sharing with the U.S. our experience and expertise in private-public partnerships in pursuing large infrastructure projects. We must also continue to pursue energy infrastructure such as pipelines and transmission lines that make our economies more competitive and sources of energy more secure for North America, and in the case of hydro and renewables, make our environment cleaner. None of these beneficial initiatives will be successful with the imposition of more restrictive Buy America provisions. Fourthly, we're committed to working with the U.S. as a cooperative manner to mutually enforce trade restrictions on countries that are not abiding by international trade laws or who have inadequate labor or environmental standards. And fifth, we see many areas of potential cooperation on the innovation front. Much of that is happening in healthcare, in energy, in areas like artificial intelligence. Cooperation among universities in Canada and the United States, private foundations, and corporations take place every day. Our government should be encouraging this and facilitating more of it happening, not putting barriers in its way. I've focused mostly on trade, but of course our bilateral relationship goes well beyond that into the obvious military partnership in NORAD, our mutual participation in NATO, as well as working together on drug enforcement, intelligence sharing, and cooperation on cybersecurity. The reality is that in almost every aspect of our lives, we work cooperatively with our neighbor, the United States of America. Our challenge is that most of this relationship works so well, it's hardly noticed, particularly by many of our friends south of the border. Our problem is that when they become more isolationist and protectionist, they can take actions that aren't aimed at us, but have unintended negative consequences, not just for us, but for them also. That's why I've been urging Canadians from all walks of life, from business, labor, federal, provincial, and municipal governments, to assist in helping highlight in very real and very tangible and very specific ways how Canada has helped, can help, and is helping to make America the great nation it has been and is now. We have, I would suggest, taken our relationship with the United States for granted, and we can no longer afford to do so. Fortunately, we have had nothing but cooperation, enthusiasm, and real tangible assistance from the business community, from labor, and from all levels of government. This effort will need to be sustained for a long time in order to be effective. We must also realize that any relationship that is as complex and all-encompassing we will not always agree. There will be disputes on specific trade matters, as there are now, and there will be policies that each of us pursue that the other will not agree with. That's called democracy, and that's called sovereignty, and we must make sure that both of these are robust and healthy. I'm pleased to say so far that our relationship with the new administration has been professional, cooperative, and productive. We also need to remember that Congress and state governments play a crucial role in our bilateral relationship. We have a challenging path ahead of us. We must continue to pursue these policies that reflect the values and aspirations of Canadians while respecting the democratically elected administration of the United States of America. And we need to work closely with the U.S. to facilitate the creation of good-paying jobs on both sides of the border. With your help and the help of Canadians from coast to coast, that's exactly what we will do. Thank you very much. Yeah.
All right. We have some questions that are going to be collected. All right. Thank you, Ambassador, and thank you for taking some questions from the audience. And if anybody has a question that they want to write in the next minute or two, please feel free, and our staff will run around and do their best to grab it. So I'll try my best to read this here. The greatest threat to Canada with new U.S. policies will not be tariffs and the border, but cheaper energy and lower taxes. In the U.S. and Canada will no longer be competitive. What is Canada's strategy since our taxes are higher and our energy costs are higher than ever with the carbon tax?
I guess you decided to start with an easy one, eh? Well, I think, you know, I'm not going to comment on personal tax rates because obviously there's a substantial difference, although, you know, depending on what state you're in, they are either higher or lower. But I think our corporate taxes are competitive, and even if the United States changes some of their tax rates, I think we can continue to be so. You know, one of a CEO of a U.S. company was telling me that one of the problems that they've had in terms of making investments in Canada is that because of their marginal or their effective tax rate in the United States is actually not the high rate, it's actually a low rate. But if they earn profits abroad and then they bring it back, they have to pay 40% tax. And so it has caused them not to make as many investments as they want to. And so if you actually bring the U.S. corporate taxes down and you can bring the profits back, particularly if you're a dividend-paying company, it'll actually facilitate more investment abroad rather than less. So I don't think that you know, as long as we maintain a competitive corporate tax rate, I don't see the corporate taxes as being a particularly, or bringing their tax rate down as being a negative thing. On the energy side of things, I mean, I think that what the Prime Minister has said, and you know, in terms of the carbon pricing, is that there is not a trade-off between pursuing environmentally friendly policies and economic growth. I'd prefer not to deal with the cost of energy in Ontario as a question, but I think I'll leave that to the provincial government to answer that question. But
we had the Minister of Energy here.
Yeah, so it's obviously maintaining competitiveness has many, many facets to it. I mean, I remember when I went into the Premier's office in 2003, and I had one of the I think it was the president of Honda Canada came to me, and it was after the blackouts had occurred in the summer of 2003, and his position was that energy costs were not a significant cost in their production, but the thing that caused them real problems was when there were blackouts or brownouts and you couldn't maintain your just-in-time supply chain, and that was much more of a factor than the actual price. Now, I know that there are other businesses where energy costs are a high percentage of it, so we have to maintain competitiveness and find ways to do that, but I don't think they're all about energy costs. I think there are other ways that we can enhance our productivity. Try and find an easier one next time, right?
I'm sifting through, don't have a lot to work with here. Another one on trade, and I don't know if it's easy, but I think it's an important one, Ambassador. If there turns out to be a prolonged softwood lumber dispute, is the federal government prepared to defend and support its softwood lumber sector, which supports 60,000 direct jobs in Ontario alone?
Yeah, I think we're going to be in for, that dispute is going to last for a bit. Obviously, until the interim finding, I think it comes in April or May or something, in terms of what the interim tariffs are going to be. If Commerce actually plays it straight, and the tariffs that are imposed are not crazy like they have been in several other cases, I think it'll put pressure on the U.S. industry to settle, but we're going to have to wait and see. I have talked to the Minister of Energy, where the natural resources, where the funding would come from, and we are looking at a support package for the Canadian industry should we get into a prolonged dispute. Obviously, we have to be careful about the way in which we might provide that assistance so that we don't cause further problems in terms of countervail. But we have been, I was hoping that we could have got something to happen before the Obama administration left, and we worked pretty hard right up to the end. But the reality is that I think that the U.S. industry that needs to sign off on any agreement, 50% of the U.S. industry has to sign off on any agreement that the administration reaches, that they felt the protectionist wind in their sails, and they were more anxious. They thought they'd get a better deal under Trump than they would under Obama in any case. So we'll see. I'm hopeful, but it's a tough one. I'd like to get that one behind us, but it's not easy. And the point that I make to the U.S. Congress and the administration is that this isn't just about the shareholders of some very important companies in our country. This is about communities that exist from British Columbia right through to the Atlantic provinces. And in many cases, they're single industry towns where we simply can't accede to these kinds of protectionist measures. And while we're anxious to get a deal, we're not prepared to do a bad deal that sees mills close and communities suffer. So,
Ambassador, I think we have time for one or two more quick questions. I think we're going to pivot a little bit from the trade questions here to something else. It's a little cheeky. So you said that relations with the new administration are positive for the most part. Can you talk about the other part? Who asked that question?
Well, I think one of the things that you've got some very talented people that are around the president. He's made some good appointments. Some of them have yet to be confirmed, but and in the White House, he has some people who are also extremely knowledgeable and talented. One of the things is that, however, is that a lot of them have not spent any time in government, and that is both a blessing and a curse in the sense that not having been in government doesn't cause you to get frustrated right out of the starting gate that you can't get things done, and they're much more oriented towards outcomes rather than process and all the rest. Having said that, some of the ideas that they have come up with are not practical and won't work and would cause damage not just to us but to them. And we've been trying to make that point and on a couple of items, and I don't really want to get into the details, but I think that they have seen some of the consequences of the actions that they thought were simple. But you know, generally speaking, I must say it's been more than cordial. I mean, what they have reinforced in every discussion we've had, every meeting we have, is that they want to build a solid, positive relationship with Canada, that they don't think that Canada is part of the problem. But as I said in my remarks, part of the problem is that a lot of them, and I, you know, in fairness, I didn't understand until I went to the United States, to Washington, the depth and the breadth of the relationship we have. And so that any move they make, even if it's designed to get at someone else, and I use the word collateral damage, I mean, it ends up. And so what we've got to be able to do is to really, you know, educate them that those kinds of things don't just hurt us, but they hurt them too. And so rather than having them make a decision and then have to back off from it, is to really build up the relationship so that they're actually thinking about that before they take an action, and we can help them with that. But as I say, you know, 90% of the interaction we've had has been extraordinarily positive. And, you know, you take people like General Kelly in Homeland Security, who, you know, has fought side by side with people like our Chief of Defense Staff. You know, the relationships are very deep and very personal, and, you know, you get Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State. I mean, he understands Canada well. There are a whole series of them who are, you know, smart and knowledgeable about Canada and very positively inclined. So I'm optimistic, but as I say, it's only going to work if we really work together. And I can tell you that I've never seen the degree of cooperation between the federal and provincial governments, between the government and business, the government and labor. And, you know, Ron Ambrose was down, excuse me, at the inauguration. And she, you know, came to the embassy, got briefed in advance, went out and did media, was very positive about the Canada-U.S. relationship. I mean, you know, her line to me, which I think is really important, is, you know, I'll fight the government in the House of Commons, but we're not going to fight in the United States. And I think that's the sentiment that is pervading all of, you know, our political and business and community relations. And I think that's really good for us.
Ambassador, there's a question in here about who's going to win the Stanley Cup, but I'll spare you that one. So thank you so much for taking our questions today.
Thank you very much.
A round of applause for the Ambassador.
At this time, it's my great pleasure to invite Mr. Darrell White from the Bank of Montreal to provide the formal thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and congratulations to you, Paul. As I think about the Empire Club of Canada's mission since 1903, the Empire Club has consistently delivered speakers who are highly interesting and with an impeccable sense of timing. And so I congratulate you on having achieved that today on both fronts. On behalf of everyone here, I want to offer our thanks to you, Ambassador MacNaughton, for your words today. Over the years, as I said, the Empire Club has had the opportunity to hear from leaders and thinkers during important moments of our history. I think it's pretty clear we find ourselves in one of those moments. Reflecting on the past few months, I'm reminded of the famous saying, "May you live in interesting times." I think I speak for everyone here when I say that all of us have been contemplating, each of us in our own ways, what the impact of the new administration will be on Canada, on our economy, on our businesses, and on our lives. Ambassador, your words today have inspired a sense of confidence that Canada's representatives are working hard to ensure that our close relationship with the United States remains strong and to the betterment of Canadians and Americans alike. Ambassador, your strength and your leadership will be more important than ever in the coming months and years. We wish you the best of luck, and we offer you our support. Thank you for your remarks today.
Thank you once again, Darryl, for your remarks, and again, a generous thank you for BMO for being our lead sponsor. We couldn't host these events. We're a not-for-profit club without sponsors. So a great thanks to BMO, as well as IBK Capital, our sesquicentennial sponsor, and Campbell Strategies, our VIP sponsors. Please a round of applause for our sponsors today. Thank you as well to National Post, which is our print media sponsor, and to Rogers TV, our local broadcaster. I'd also like to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, for live webcasting today's events to thousands of viewers around the world. And although our club has been around since 1903, we are in the 21st century and active on social media. So please follow us on Twitter at Empire_Club and visit us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn as well. Finally, please join us for a few upcoming events. On February the 8th, we have a discussion called For Whom the Road Tolls, a panel discussion on road tolls. I didn't come up with the title. I take credit for it. So another very interesting topic. I'll leave that there. And another exciting event, we have an evening event on February the 13th with Dr. Catherine Zahn. She's the president and CEO of CAMH. And she'll be talking again as part of our sesquicentennial series about 150 years of mental health and how we need to do better. So thank you once again for attending today's lunch. This is our largest turnout of the year. I hope you have a fantastic afternoon, and this meeting is now adjourned.